Welcome to Science Exposed, the show that takes you deep into the world of cutting-edge science.
It's always a pleasure to be here.
And today's deep dive is no exception. We're going to be tackling a really interesting question.
Okay, I'm intrigued already.
It's all about data ownership in healthcare, but with a really fascinating twist.
Oh, okay, a twist. Let's hear it.
We're specifically looking at how this all plays out in the realm of integrative healthcare, IHC.
Right, IHC. That's where things get really interesting because it's not just your typical medical records anymore.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole data ownership question so much more complex when you bring IHC into the picture.
Yeah, because IHC is all about treating the whole person.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're talking about way more data than just your blood pressure and cholesterol levels.
Right. We're looking at lifestyle factors, social determinants of health, even things like patient-reported outcomes from mindfulness practices.
Really a holistic approach, and that's what makes IHC so unique, but also what makes the data it generates so incredibly diverse and valuable.
And the twist you mentioned at the beginning.
Oh, yeah. The twist, we're also factoring in the role of AI.
Ah, AI. That's the other big player in this whole data game.
For sure. Because AI is being used more and more to analyze all this IHC data, to do things like personalized risk assessments, symptom analysis, even nutritional guidance and real-time monitoring.
Okay, wow. It sounds like we're on the verge of some major breakthroughs in healthcare with all this data and AI power.
Absolutely. But before we get too carried away with the possibilities, we need to address a fundamental question. Who owns all this data?
Right. That's the million-dollar question. Because there are so many potential stakeholders involved.
Okay. Like who? We have the patients themselves, obviously. They're the ones generating the data in the first place, right?
Yeah. But it's not quite that simple. Think about it. You've got the IHC providers who are gathering the data during treatments and maybe even developing new interventions based on it.
Oh, right. And then there are researchers studying IHC practices and outcomes. They need access to data to advance the field.
And don't forget about the AI and machine learning developers who are training algorithms using this data.
It's like a whole ecosystem of data stakeholders, each with their own interests and claims.
Exactly. And that's where the whole concept of data ownership gets really tricky.
Yeah, because if it's not clear who owns the data, how can we ensure that it's being used responsibly and ethically?
Especially in a field like IHC where trust and transparency are so crucial.
Absolutely. So that's what we're going to be diving into today, the different models of data ownership and how they apply to this unique IHC landscape.
Sounds like a fascinating deep dive I'm ready to explore.
Well, to guide our exploration today, we're going to be using a research article titled Data Ownership in the AI-Powered Integrative Healthcare Landscape.
Catchy title.
It really lays out the complexities of this issue and explores some potential solutions.
Okay, so where do we start? What's the first model of data ownership we should unpack?
Let's start with the most straightforward one. The privatization postulate.
Now, tell me more about this privatization thing in the context of health data.
Essentially, it's the idea that data is like any other commodity, something you own and control.
So like a car or a house, you buy it, you own it, you can do whatever you want with it.
Right. And in the context of health data, this means that individuals or organizations could own and profit from their data.
Okay, I see the appeal. It could definitely incentivize data collection and innovation if there's a potential for profit.
Exactly. But there are also some major downsides to this approach, especially when it comes to IHC.
Yeah, like what are the potential pitfalls here?
Well, for one thing, it could lead to data silos. If everyone is hoarding their own data, it becomes much harder to get a complete picture of a patient's health.
Right, and that's a big problem for IHC, which relies on a team of providers working together to treat the whole person.
Not to mention the potential impact on research. Imagine trying to study the effectiveness of a new IHC treatment if you can't access data from multiple sources.
So privatization could actually hinder the advancement of IHC treatments if it's not carefully managed.
Exactly. It's like building walls around data instead of bridges.
Okay, so it's not as simple as just saying patients own their data and that's that.
Right. There's a lot more nuance to it. And that's why we need to consider other models of data ownership.
Okay, so what's the next one on the list?
Let's talk about communization.
Communization. That sounds interesting. What's the gist of that one?
It's kind of the opposite of privatization. Instead of treating data as a private commodity, communization views it as a public good.
Okay, so like clean air or public parks, something that should be accessible to everyone.
Exactly. And in the context of health data, this means that data would be openly shared for the benefit of everyone.
Wow. Now that sounds like it could really accelerate progress in IHC. Imagine researchers having access to vast amounts of data to study different treatments and outcomes.
The potential for collaboration and breakthroughs is huge.
But wait a minute. Doesn't that raise some serious concerns about privacy and security if everyone has access to everyone's data?
You're right. It's not a perfect solution. Communization comes with its own set of challenges.
Like, how do you ensure responsible AI use and equitable sharing of benefits?
And how do you address the privacy concerns of patients who might not be comfortable with their data being so widely accessible?
It's a delicate balance for sure.
It seems like finding the right balance is the key to this whole data ownership puzzle.
Absolutely. It's not about finding one perfect model that solves everything. It's about understanding the strengths and weaknesses of each approach and finding ways to mitigate the risks.
And that's why it's so important to have these conversations to really grapple with the complexities of data ownership in healthcare.
I couldn't agree more. It's a topic that deserves careful consideration and ongoing dialogue.
Especially as AI becomes more integrated into our lives and the amount of data we generate continues to grow exponentially.
Exactly. We're all stakeholders in this data-driven world, and we need to work together to ensure that data is being used in a way that benefits everyone.
Okay, so we've talked about privatization and communization, two ends of the spectrum, but there are also some models that fall somewhere in between, right?
Right. There are a bunch of different approaches that try to address the specific challenges of healthcare data.
And the article highlights a few of these more tailored models. Let's start with distributed access control.
Distributed access control. Okay, break that down for me. What's that all about?
Basically, it means that each provider or organization would control access to their own data.
So kind of like having separate locked rooms with different keys?
Exactly. It's a way to prioritize privacy and security by limiting who can access the information.
Okay, that makes sense. But wouldn't that lead to a very fragmented picture of a patient's health?
You're right. If all the data is scattered across different systems with different access rules, it can be challenging to get a complete understanding of someone's health history and current needs.
And that could make it harder to provide coordinated care, especially in IHC where we're trying to address the whole person.
Exactly. And it could also slow down research if it's difficult to obtain a large, comprehensive data set.
So it's a trade-off. More security, but potentially less coordination and collaboration.
Right, it's that balancing act again.
Okay, so what's another model that tries to address these challenges?
The article mentions something called data trusts.
Data trusts. Sounds intriguing. What are those all about?
Basically, it's the idea of having a neutral third party manage data for multiple stakeholders.
Okay, so like a trusted intermediary who ensures that everyone plays by the rules.
Exactly. And this third party would be responsible for things like setting access policies, ensuring data security, and addressing any conflicts that arise.
It sounds like a way to promote both collaboration and accountability.
Exactly. It's a way to build trust into the system.
But I imagine setting up and maintaining these data trusts could be pretty complex and expensive.
You're right. There are definitely some logistical challenges, but the potential benefits could outweigh the costs, especially if it leads to more ethical and responsible data use.
Okay, so data trusts, another option on the table. What else is out there?
Well, we can't talk about data ownership without mentioning the elephant in the room, blockchain technology.
Ah, yes, blockchain. It seems like it's being touted as a solution for everything these days.
For good reason, too. It has the potential to revolutionize how we manage and share data.
Okay, remind me how blockchain actually works again.
It's essentially a digital ledger that records every transaction in a secure and transparent way.
So it's like an unbreakable chain of records that can't be tampered with.
Exactly. And because it's decentralized, it's not controlled by any single entity, which makes it more resistant to censorship and manipulation.
Okay, I see the appeal. But how does this apply to health data specifically?
Well, in the context of IHC, blockchain could be used to create a secure and transparent record of data ownership.
So everyone would know exactly where the data came from, who has access to it, and how it's being used.
Right. It could really boost trust and accountability in the system.
That's crucial in a field like IHC where collaboration is so important.
Exactly. But like any new technology, blockchain also comes with its own set of challenges.
Like, what are the potential downsides here?
Well, scalability is a big one. Blockchain systems can be slow and expensive to operate, especially when dealing with the massive volumes of data generated in healthcare.
Right. And then there's the whole issue of regulation. The legal framework around blockchain is still very much in development, which creates some uncertainty.
It's a powerful tool with lots of potential,
Ugh.
but we need to be mindful of the challenges and proceed with caution.
Okay, so we've got a whole buffet of data ownership models, each with its own pros and cons. But I'm curious, is there one model that the article kind of favors or recommends for IHC?
Well, they do propose a new framework that they believe is particularly well suited to the unique challenges of IHC in the age of AI.
Oh, okay.
Hmm.
Now I'm really interested. Tell me more. What's this new framework all about?
It's called the Collaborative Healthcare Data Ownership Model, or CHDO for short.
CHDO. Okay, I like the sound of that already. It sounds collaborative.
And that's the whole point. The CHDO model is built on the idea that multiple parties contribute value to the data, so multiple parties should have a stake in its ownership.
So it's moving away from this winner-takes-all approach to data ownership.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of contributions and fostering a more collaborative environment.
I like that. It sounds much more in line with the spirit of IHC.
Right, because IHC is all about teamwork and shared decision-making.
Exactly. So how does this shared ownership actually work in practice? Can you give me an example?
Sure. Imagine a patient using a wearable device to track their sleep patterns as part of an IHC treatment plan.
Okay, that's a good example. So who owns the data in that scenario?
Well, under the CHDO model, the patient would retain ownership of their raw data.
Okay, that makes sense. They're the ones generating the data.
Right. But the IHC provider might have access to analyze that data in the context of the treatment plan.
Okay, so the provider can use the data to make informed decisions about the patient's care.
Exactly. And researchers studying sleep patterns in IHC patients could access anonymized aggregated data from multiple patients to draw broader conclusions.
Ah, so the data can be used to advance research without compromising individual privacy.
Right. And AI developers could use this anonymized data to improve algorithms for sleep analysis.
So everyone benefits from the data in different ways while respecting individual privacy and recognizing the value of each stakeholder's contribution.
Precisely. It's about creating a system where everyone feels represented and the power dynamics are more balanced.
I'm really liking the CHDO model. It seems like a very thoughtful and nuanced approach to data ownership in IHC,
And it's specifically designed to address the unique challenges of this field.
which is what we need because IHC is different from conventional medicine in so many ways.
Absolutely. And the CHDO model takes those differences into account.
Okay, so tell me more about what makes this model so well suited for IHC. What are the key advantages here?
Well, for one thing, the CHDO model recognizes that IHC thrives on collaboration.
Right, that's one of the core principles of IHC, bringing together different providers and approaches to treat the whole person.
Exactly. And the CHDO model, with its emphasis on data sharing and recognition of multiple stakeholders' contributions, is essential for supporting that collaborative spirit.
Okay, that makes sense. What else?
Well, another key advantage is that the CHDO model prioritizes patient control over their data.
Right, which is crucial in IHC because we're often dealing with very sensitive information.
Exactly. Patients need to feel confident that their data is being handled ethically and responsibly.
And that their privacy is being protected.
Absolutely.
Right.
And the CHDO model, with its focus on defined access and control, helps to build that trust.
Okay, so it sounds like the CHDO model is trying to create a system where everyone wins: patients, providers, researchers, AI developers.
Exactly. It's not about picking winners and losers. It's about finding a solution that works for everyone.
I love that philosophy. It's very much in line with the holistic approach of IHC.
Right. It's about creating a more equitable and ethical data ecosystem.
But let's be realistic. Is this model actually feasible to implement? Are there any major challenges or roadblocks?
Of course. There are always challenges when you're trying to implement something new, especially in a field as complex as healthcare.
Right. So what are some of the hurdles that the CHDO model might face?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is going to be getting everyone on board with this new way of thinking about data ownership.
Right, because it requires a shift in mindset, moving away from this idea of data as a private commodity to a more collaborative approach.
Exactly. And that's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take education and advocacy and a willingness to work together.
I imagine there will also be some logistical challenges, like how do you actually implement these shared ownership structures in practice?
You're right. There are a lot of details to work out. But the article argues that the benefits of the CHDO model are so significant that it's worth investing the time and effort to figure it out.
Okay, I'm convinced I'm on board with the CHDO model, but I'm also curious to hear more about those defined access and control mechanisms you mentioned earlier.
We'll definitely dive into those after a quick break.
Sounds good. I'm ready to learn more about how the CHDO model tackles the issues of privacy, security, and responsible AI use.
Stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back with more on the fascinating world of data ownership in IHC.
Can't wait. This is a conversation I think everyone needs to be having.
Absolutely. It's about shaping the future of healthcare in a way that benefits everyone.
I'm excited to see where this all leads.
Me too. And I hope you'll join us for the journey.
I wouldn't miss it.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Science Exposed for more deep dives into the world of cutting-edge science.
And be sure to check out our show notes for more ways to connect with Dr. Cameron Jones, the mastermind behind these fascinating explorations.
We'll be right back.
So those defined access and control mechanisms you mentioned before the break.
Yeah, let's unpack that a bit. How does the CHDO model actually handle those concerns around privacy, security, and responsible AI use?
It all boils down to setting clear boundaries and establishing strong safeguards.
Okay, so like drawing lines in the sand about who can access what data and for what purpose.
Exactly. And the CHDO model really emphasizes the importance of giving patients control over their own health information.
That makes sense. After all, it is their data, right?
Right, so patients should have the right to decide who can access their data and how it can be used.
But how do we balance that need for patient control with the potential benefits of using this data for research and development? We don't want to stifle innovation by locking everything down, right?
It's definitely a balancing act, but the CHDO model suggests that anonymized or aggregated data could be accessible to researchers and developers for pre-approved purposes.
Okay. So we can still learn from the data and develop new treatments without compromising individual privacy.
Precisely. It's about finding a middle ground that respects everyone's interests.
Okay. Now let's talk about that fair and transparent governance piece of the CHDO model. What does that actually look like in practice?
It's all about establishing clear rules and procedures for how data is accessed, used, and shared.
So it's like creating a rule of the road for the data highway.
I like that analogy. And these rules should be transparent and accessible to everyone.
So no more shady backroom deals with data. Everything out in the open.
Exactly. And there should be mechanisms in place to ensure accountability and address any conflicts that arise.
So it's like having a system of checks and balances to make sure that the data is being used ethically and responsibly.
Precisely. The CHDO model is trying to create a data democracy where everyone has a voice and the power dynamics are more balanced.
Now that sounds like a future I can get behind. But let's talk about the practicality of all this. Is the CHDO model really something that can be implemented in the real world?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And to be honest, the article doesn't give us a definitive answer.
Okay, so it's more of a theoretical framework at this point.
Yeah, but it does lay out a compelling vision for how data ownership could work in IHC.
And it highlights some key principles that we need to keep in mind as we move forward in this data-driven world.
Absolutely, like the importance of collaboration, transparency, and patient empowerment.
Okay, so let's recap. The CHDO model is designed to address the unique challenges of data ownership in IHC by emphasizing shared ownership-defined access and control and fair and transparent governance.
Exactly. It's a holistic approach to data ownership, just like IHC is a holistic approach to healthcare.
Love it. It all comes full circle.
And that's why the article argues that the CHDO model is so well suited for IHC.
It's like a match made in data heaven.
Exactly. The CHDO model recognizes that IHC is all about collaboration and trust, and it tries to build those values into the data ecosystem.
But let's be real. There are going to be challenges implementing any new model, especially one that requires such a fundamental shift in how we think about data.
For sure. Like getting everyone on board with this idea of shared ownership.
Yeah, that's going to require a lot of education and outreach, helping people understand the benefits of this approach.
And addressing those concerns about privacy and security.
Absolutely.
Right.
We need to make sure that patients feel comfortable and confident sharing their data.
Which is crucial in IHC because we're often dealing with very sensitive information.
Right. And we need to find ways to implement these shared ownership structures in a way that's both practical and secure.
It's definitely not going to be easy, but I think it's a challenge worth tackling.
I agree. Because the potential benefits are huge. If we can get this right, we could unlock incredible advancements in IHC.
Imagine a future where AI is being used to personalize healthcare in ways we never thought possible.
Yeah, and where data is being shared seamlessly between providers, researchers, and patients to accelerate the development of new treatments and interventions.
That's a future worth striving for.
Absolutely. And the CHDO model could help us get there.
Okay. So where do we go from here? What are the next steps?
Well, I think the first step is to continue having these conversations, to raise awareness about the importance of data ownership in IHC.
Right, because this is not just an issue for techies and policymakers. It affects everyone.
Absolutely. And we need to start thinking about how we can implement these principles of shared ownership, defined access and control, and fair and transparent governance in the real world.
It's time to move from theory to practice.
Exactly. And I think the CHDO model gives us a solid framework to work with.
Agreed. It's a roadmap for a more ethical and equitable data future.
I'm excited to see where this all leads.
Me too. It feels like we're on the cusp of something truly transformative in healthcare.
And it all starts with recognizing the importance of data ownership.
Well said, data is power, and we need to make sure that power is being used responsibly and for the benefit of all.
So we've covered a lot of ground today, from the very basics of data ownership to this really intriguing CHDO model.
Yeah, it's been a pretty deep dive into the world of data in IHC.
And I think it's clear that this whole issue of data ownership is not going away anytime soon.
No, not at all. If anything, it's going to become even more important as AI becomes more integrated into healthcare.
Absolutely. Because the more data we collect and the more sophisticated our AI systems become, the more critical it is to have clear guidelines and safeguards in place.
Right. We need to make sure that we're not just blindly embracing new technology without considering the ethical implications.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between innovation and responsibility.
And the CHDO model seems like a really promising step in that direction.
I agree. It's a framework that acknowledges the complexity of data ownership in IHC and offers a way to balance the needs of all stakeholders.
And it emphasizes those key values of collaboration, transparency, and patient empowerment.
Which are all essential for building a truly patient-centered healthcare system.
Absolutely. And that's ultimately what we're all striving for, right? A system that puts patients first and uses data to improve their health and well-being.
100%. And I think the CHDO model gives us a roadmap for how to get there.
It's a starting point for sure, a foundation we can build on.
And it's a conversation that we need to keep having. We need to keep asking questions, challenging assumptions, and working together to create a future where data is used ethically and responsibly.
I couldn't agree more. This is not just a technical issue. It's a societal issue that affects us all.
And it's one that we need to address head-on with courage and compassion.
Well said. We need to be bold in our thinking, but also mindful of the potential consequences.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot between progress and protection.
And the CHDO model helps us navigate that complex terrain.
It's like a compass guiding us toward a more ethical and equitable data future.
I like that analogy, a compass for the data age.
And like any good compass, it points us in the right direction, but doesn't tell us exactly how to get there.
Right. We still have to make the journey ourselves.
Exactly, but at least we have a map to guide us.
And that's a huge step forward.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into data ownership in IHC, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay, I'm listening.
Data is powerful, but it's up to us to decide how that power is used.
We have a choice to make. Will we use data to create a more just and equitable world? Or will we allow it to exacerbate existing inequalities?
It's a question that each of us needs to grapple with, not just as healthcare professionals, but as citizens of this data-driven world.
Because ultimately, the future of healthcare is in our hands.
And the choices we make today will determine the kind of world we create tomorrow.
So let's choose wisely. Let's use data to build a better future for all.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And that's a wrap on another episode of Science Exposed. A huge thank you to Dr. Cameron Jones for curating this thought-provoking deep dive.
It's always a pleasure to be here.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode. What resonated with you? What questions are you still grappling with?
Be sure to share your comments and connect with us on social media.
And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Science Exposed for more explorations of cutting-edge science.
Until next time, stay curious.